As we begin week 9, take just a moment to celebrate the fact that we finished more than half of the class. In this week's lecture, we're going to learn about a topic that very few of us are familiar with, gestalt psychology. Throughout the lecture, I'll explain what gestalt psychology is, how it was founded, how it came to the United States, and how it impacted the field of psychology. Naturally, I'd like to start by explaining the focus of gestalt psychology. Many of you have probably never heard of gestalt psychology, and that's okay because you're going to learn about it in this lecture. One of the reasons I include this topic in this course is because it ends up being one of the favorites. It ends up being a topic that a lot of students enjoy learning about. So while we no longer have gestalt psychology, it's an interesting topic. So let's learn more about it. In the early 1910s, several German scholars banded together and established what we today call gestalt psychology. The word gestalt means shape, which is sort of relevant to what they studied. They focused on perception, learning, problem solving, memory. All of these topics have to do with shapes in some way. We call gestalt psychology a macroscopic approach rather than a microscopic approach because gestalt psychologists were trying to understand how the human mind puts everything together, how we take in information from our environment and make sense of it. They were not so much concerned with the elements of the mind like the structuralists were, and they were not so much concerned with the function of different processes. It was founded by 3 German psychologists, Max Wertheimer, Kurt Kafka, and Wolfgang Kuhla. In the 1920s, it was popular in Germany and had spread to the United States. Gestalt psychology actually started at the University of Berlin, but these 3 individuals and Kurt Lewin, who we'll learn about later on in the lecture, these 4 people helped bring Gestalt psychology from Germany to the United States. They emphasized the importance of focusing on the whole experience, not its individual parts or its functions. In this way, Gestalt psychologists were known for disagreeing with structuralists and functionalists. All 3 of these perspectives were emerging and being promoted at the same time. We are still in the early 1900s. Psychology had just been established in the late 1800s, 1879, and in the beginning of the 1900s, all of these new ideas were coming to fruition, being tested, being criticized, being shared, being experimented with. In 1926, one of the founders, Wertheimer, said, "We perceive the whole sum of objects, not its individual parts. Everything that you are looking at right now, the computer screen, this video, you are perceiving it as a whole. You're not looking at each individual part of the computer or the slide. You sort of see it all at once. There are a lot of things in your view right now." Gestalt psychologists wanted to focus on that whole experience rather than trying to understand how we see the letters on the video, how we hear someone's voice, how we experience it in terms of emotional responses. Gestalt psychologists wanted to focus on the big picture, how all of those things sort of fit together to create what you are seeing and experiencing right now. The 3 founders did not come up with their ideas all on their own. They had learned from others who came before them. They had read their books, read their articles, sometimes even learned from them directly in the classroom. In 1886, Ernst Mach said the whole experience of an object or an event is more important to perception than the experience of just its parts. You can see the relationship between what Wertheimer said and what Mach said. And these two things were said nearly 40 years apart. One of the other founders, Kuhler, was credited with coming up with their guiding principle. The whole is different from the sum of its parts. Different, not greater than or less than, but different. And they used a lot of music and visuals to illustrate the principles of Gestalt psychology. This is probably one of the reasons why it is a little bit more interesting than some of the other perspectives, because we can see examples of it. In the example that I have here on the left, you see the parts of the image on the right. The parts don't mean anything by themselves. They don't make a bike unless they are put together in a certain way. Our brains require those parts to be organized in a certain way in order for those parts to make any sense. On the left, there is no bicycle. The parts are there, but they don't mean anything. On the right is an image of a bicycle. It means something, but when we perceive the bicycle on the right, when we recognize, oh, yep, that's a bicycle, we aren't thinking 2 circles, X number of lines, X number of triangles. We're not thinking about that. We think bicycle. Another individual by the name of Christian von Ehrenfels said that some qualities of an experience persist even when the parts of that experience change. For example, we recognize a melody, a song, even when it's played in a different key or when it's played by a different instrument. For the next few minutes, you're going to watch a video that I have already created and posted on YouTube. I will check back in with you after you've watched it. In all three of these examples, you recognized that both instruments were playing the same song. The components changed, the key, the instrument, but you still recognized that it was the same song. That is because when you perceive that song, when you hear it, your brain focuses on the whole experience. In 1935, Kurt Kafka published his book, Principles of Gestalt Psychology. And in this book, he made a distinction between reality and what we perceive. The geographical environment, as shown here on the right, is the world as it really is, as it is in reality. Geographical, think geography, think science, think external world. On the left, you see behavioral environment, which includes reality as we perceive it. When you hear the word behavioral, think about yourself, about the individual, about your own behaviors. So Kafka differentiated between these two perspectives, the world as it really is and the world as we perceive it. One of the reasons he made this distinction is because he recognized that sometimes the geographical environment does not match the behavioral environment, as depicted in this image here. The character in reality is thinner than he is in his mind, in the way that he sees himself. The mirror reflects the behavioral environment. The mirror suggests that this individual perceives themselves as a very buff, strong individual. When our perceptions match reality, they are accurate. When our perceptions do not match the geographical environment, they are inaccurate. This makes sense to a lot of us, but this was one of those early principles that Gestalt psychologists focused on. They were trying to show that when we perceive the whole of an object or an experience, we sometimes leave out details. We don't remember everything about everything we see all day long. You may have walked by several people today. Do you remember what color their shirt was, what color their shoes were? Do you remember what kind of backpack they had? Do you remember all of this information? Probably not, because when you were walking to class or when you were walking to your computer, you weren't thinking about paying attention to the clothes other people were wearing. Gestalt psychologists recognized that many of us have a view of the world, but it doesn't always match up with what is actually there.